On the night of the 20th of December 1995, American Airlines Flight 965 slammed into a mountain ridge near Buga, Colombia. It was an accident that would forever change the way aviation understands human error and automation. The plane was not broken or out of control. It was working normally and being flown by an experienced crew. But it was unknowingly guided into the ground because the crew did not realize how close they were to the terrain. Of the 163 people on board, 159 were killed, leaving just 4 survivors. After a thorough investigation, investigators found that the crash was not caused by one simple error, but by several problems happening one after another. In this video, we'll break down the story of American Airlines Flight 965, the critical decisions made in the cockpit, and how a series of small mistakes combined into a fatal loss. American Airlines Flight 965 was part of a rapid expansion by U.S. Airlines into South America during the 1990s. The aircraft assigned to the flight was a Boeing and registered N651AA, one of the most advanced airliners of its time. Featuring a modern glass cockpit and delivered to American Airlines in 1991. Powered by 2 Rolls-Royce RB211 engines, the aircraft was known for strong performance and reliability, particularly in high-altitude operations. Maintenance records showed no mechanical concerns. In the cockpit were Captain Nicholas Tafuri and First Officer Don Williams. Captain Tafuri was highly experienced, with roughly 13,000 flight hours, including more than 2,200 hours on the Boeing 757 and 767. First Officer Williams also had significant experience, logging nearly 5,800 total hours, over 2,200 of them on the same aircraft type. Both pilots were well rested, having been off duty for several days before the flight. Flight 965 was scheduled to leave Miami International Airport for Cali, Colombia, at 4:40 p.m. Eastern Time. The flight was delayed because a winter storm in the northeastern United States delayed connecting passengers and their luggage, causing the airline to wait before departure. After the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, heavy seasonal ground traffic at Miami caused further delays, and by the time Flight 965 departed, it was almost 2 hours behind schedule. Flying into Cali, Colombia, was much more challenging than a typical flight in the United States. The airport sits at the end of a long valley, surrounded by mountains on both sides. Some of these mountain ridges rise as high as 14,000 feet. For planes approaching from the north, the land rises quickly near nearby towns, creating a narrow and unforgiving path that leaves little room for mistakes. One major factor in the accident was the absence of working air traffic control radar around Cali. In 1992, the radar site had been destroyed in an attack by the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. With no radar coverage, controllers could not see the aircraft on their screens. Under normal conditions, radar allows controllers to track a plane's position and warn crews if they drift toward dangerous terrain or descend below a safe altitude. In Cali, that safety net did not exist. Controllers had to rely entirely on what the pilots reported over the radio, leaving them effectively blind, unable to confirm the aircraft's true position or notice the course deviation that ultimately led to the crash. After departing Miami, Flight 965 continued normally as it crossed into Colombian airspace. At 9:26 p.m., while cruising at 37,000 feet, the crew requested clearance to begin their descent. Air traffic control cleared the aircraft down in stages, first to 24,000 feet, then to 20,000. A few minutes later, at 9:34 p.m., the captain contacted Cali Approach, reporting they were 63 miles north of the Cali VOR, marking the start of the final phase of the flight. Under normal circumstances, an aircraft arriving from the north would fly past the airport, continue to the Cali VOR, execute a procedure turn, and then return to land on runway 01. But that night, conditions were calm. With no significant wind, the controller offered a faster option, a straight-in VOR DME approach to runway 19. Accepting it would allow the aircraft to descend directly toward the airport, saving nearly 12 minutes of flight time. Already delayed by more than 2 hours and aware of looming crew rest limits, the captain agreed. He replied that they would need a lower altitude immediately. Moments later, the controller cleared Flight 965 for the VOR DME approach to runway 19 via the Rosso 1 arrival, and instructed the crew to report when passing the Tulua VOR. Accepting the straight-in approach meant the crew had to quickly reprogram the aircraft's flight management system. The Boeing's FMS was designed to simplify navigation, but in this case, that automation became a hidden danger. When the captain selected a direct-to-Cali command to clean up the display, the system automatically removed every waypoint between the aircraft and the Cali VOR. Among them was Tulua. The very fix air traffic control had instructed the crew to report passing. As the aircraft continued a rapid descent, speed brakes extended. The crew suddenly realized Tulua was no longer visible on their navigation screens. Now under increasing workload, the captain attempted to re-enter the next navigation point, the Rosso beacon. On the Jeppesen charts, Rosso was identified by a single letter, just one character, the letter R. When the captain entered the letter R into the flight management system and pressed execute, the computer did exactly what it was designed to do. It generated a list of navigation points that shared that identifier, ranked by database logic, not by pilot intent. At the top of the list was the Romeo NDB near Bogota, more than 130 miles to the northeast. The Rosso beacon near Cali, though labeled simply as R on the approach chart, was not accessible that way. In the FMS, it required its full name, Rosso. Unaware of the difference, the captain selected the first option on the list and executed the command. In that instant, the autopilot quietly reprogrammed the aircraft to turn away from the valley. At 9:37 p.m., Flight 965 began a left descending turn, leaving the center of the safe approach path and steering directly toward the rising Andes. For nearly 90 seconds, the crew questioned the unexpected turn, but they did not yet realize the truth. Their aircraft was no longer heading toward Cali. It was flying east into mountainous terrain marked on charts as a danger zone. As the aircraft continued its turn toward the mountains, it was also descending rapidly to meet the altitude requirements for the runway 19 approach. To increase the rate of descent without accelerating the aircraft, the first officer who was flying the plane extended the speed brakes to their maximum position. At 9:41 p.m., as Flight 965 passed through 8,839 feet, traveling at 240 knots, the ground proximity warning system suddenly came alive. Terrain, pull up. The alert came from an early generation warning system, one that could only sense the ground directly beneath the aircraft. It did not look ahead. It warned only when the closing rate with the terrain below became critical. The crew reacted immediately. The captain advanced the throttles to full power. The first officer pulled the nose up sharply, pitching the aircraft to more than 20 degrees, executing the standard escape maneuver. But in the urgency of the moment, one crucial step was missed. The speed brakes remained fully extended, and with them still deployed, the aircraft's ability to climb was fatally reduced. The failure to retract the speed brakes had a devastating effect on the aircraft's ability to climb. On the Boeing 757, speed brakes do not automatically retract when thrust is applied in flight. So even as the engines surged to full power, the spoiler panels remained extended across the wings. That created enormous drag and reduced lift, effectively holding the aircraft down as it tried to climb. According to later performance studies, The extended speed brakes reduced the aircraft's climb capability by as much as 30 to 40%. In the final seconds, that loss of performance made the difference between escape and impact. At 9:41 p.m., the aircraft struck trees near the summit of El Diluvio. It was pitched upward at nearly 28 degrees on the edge of an aerodynamic stall as the stick shaker activated inside the cockpit. The tail hit first. For a brief moment, the aircraft appeared to clear the ridge, but the impact tore the wings and engines apart, and the fuselage broke free, crashing down the far side of the mountain. Investigators initially described the crash as a non-survivable event given the speed of impact and the remote mountain terrain. The wreckage came to rest near the town of Buga, roughly 33 miles northeast of the Cali VOR, at an elevation of nearly 9,000 feet. The night of the 20th of December 1995 was clear but moonless. With no ambient light, the surrounding mountains blended into the darkness, creating a deadly black hole effect, where the terrain was impossible to distinguish from the night sky. Out of the 163 people on board, only 4 survived long enough to be rescued the following morning. All 4 were seated in the same area of the aircraft, over the wings, in rows 20 to 22, one of the strongest sections of the fuselage, where the structure absorbed part of the impact. Among the survivors was Mercedes Ramirez Johnson, a 21-year-old traveling with her parents to celebrate her birthday. She suffered a broken leg and severe internal injuries and waited nearly 18 hours on the mountainside before help arrived. Mauricio Reyes, a student, was also found alive and in stable condition. Gonzalo Dusan Monroy survived alongside his young daughter, Michelle Dusan, who was just 6 years old at the time. A 5th survivor, Gonzalo Dusan Jr., aged 13, was pulled from the wreckage alive, but later died during surgery from internal injuries. Amid the devastation, even a dog named Milagro was found alive in the cargo hold, a rare and haunting reminder of survival in an otherwise overwhelming tragedy. Search and rescue efforts were severely hampered by the remote location and security concerns. The crash occurred in a red zone controlled by guerrillas, making it dangerous for civil defense teams to enter without military escort. As the night progressed, thick fog rolled over the mountains, grounding helicopters and making aerial access impossible until daylight. With no other option, rescuers were forced to climb the steep, rugged terrain on foot. By the time they reached the site, they found the remains of the Boeing 757 scattered across the mountainside, broken into 3 main sections and still smoldering in the darkness. In the weeks after the crash, a second tragedy unfolded. While recovery teams were still on the mountain, looters reached the wreckage by helicopter, stripping valuable aircraft parts. Some of those components later appeared on the black market, sold as airworthy, despite having been exposed to impact and fire. The discovery forced regulators to act, launching global efforts to stop unapproved aircraft parts from ever flying again. But the greatest changes came inside the cockpit. The warning system on Flight 965 gave the crew only seconds to react. It could not see the mountains ahead, only the ground beneath. That failure led to the worldwide adoption of enhanced terrain warning systems, capable of looking miles into the aircraft's future path. Since then, controlled flight into terrain accidents have nearly disappeared from major airlines. Pilot training changed as well. Crews were taught not just how to use automation, but when to step away from it. Critical escape procedures were redesigned to become instinctive under pressure. In the end, Flight 965 was not caused by a single error. It was a chain of small failures, delays, lost radar, confusing automation, and missteps that aligned with tragic precision.